Okay, welcome and good afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Nancy O'Malley, the elected district attorney of Alameda County. DA O'Malley is a personal hero of mine, not just because she's the first woman to be the DA of Alameda. DA O'Malley runs an office that has a national reputation as one of the top DA offices in the country. Her career has centered on combating violence against women. And many elected DAs work to improve the lives of those in the community in which they're elected. But DA O'Malley has not confined herself to only helping Alameda County residents. She's written more than 40 bills that have become laws, including the Sexual Assault Victim Bill of Rights. She founded the Family Justice Center in Alameda County, which provides comprehensive services for victims of domestic and family violence. And that is a model for family justice centers in other counties. DA O'Malley has created the first human exploitation and trafficking HEAT vertical prosecution unit in Alameda. And to date, her office has prosecuted more than 740 trafficking cases involving minors or young adults. And after seeing success prosecuting human traffickers and protecting victims from them, DA O'Malley then created HEAT Watch, which provides other communities with blueprints to combat human trafficking themselves. And this has been followed by the US Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services. And DA O'Malley took her efforts even further and created the HEAT Institute, which examines the root causes and strategies for effective responses with the goal of ending human trafficking in California. And insiders tell me that O'Malley's passion to serve her community and affect change started early. As a teenager volunteering with the Rape Crisis Center, O'Malley suggested and then demanded that her local DA's office fund the Rape Crisis Center, and the DA's office could not say no. Not surprisingly, O'Malley has received numerous awards for her leadership and her work, and I'll just name 3 of them. The American Bar Association's Margaret Brent Award for achieving professional excellence and paving the way for other women in the profession, the Lois Haight Award of Excellence in Innovation from the United States Congress Victim Rights Caucus, and the James Irvine Leadership Award in 2017 for her groundbreaking work combating human trafficking. So it is my honor and privilege to turn things over now to Nancy O'Malley. And as she presents, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, which I'll be monitoring. And at the end of her presentation, I'll ask some of those questions. So thank you so much, Ms. O'Malley.
Thank you very much, Professor Moran. I am humbled by your introduction of me. And I will say that it has been my life's passion to make sure that we are fair, equitable, diverse, but particularly that victims of crime, and especially interpersonal violence crimes, have a voice and a pathway for resilience and recovery. So I'm really happy to be with all of you today. I am going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing here, and particularly my message is really centered around how communities need to come together. You know, this issue of human trafficking, particularly when we start talking about children, is not any one agency or any one person's to solve. We all have to come together. And I will say also that coming from a position of institution, that I absolutely hold other institutions accountable for being involved and helping provide the resources and the solutions and the engagement that we need to be able to combat effectively human trafficking of all forms. Today, I'm going to focus more on sex trafficking, but I will touch a little bit on labor trafficking. It's estimated that labor trafficking is probably more prominent and prevalent than sex trafficking. But sex and in both areas, labor and sex, we see an overwhelming involvement of children and young people. And that's an important component because they will live their whole life with the trauma of having been victimized, or maybe live their life in slavery And all the while, we could have done something about it and help them find their voice and find their path out. So I'm going to put up my PowerPoint now. And I hope you all can see it. Professor Moran, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to talk today, you heard from Professor Moran, the name of the title of the initiative that I created in 2005, I started with creating the first HEAT unit. You know, in 2004, we did not even have a law in California addressing human trafficking. I and another woman in my office proposed a bill to identify human trafficking back in about 2003. And nobody knew what we were talking about in the legislature. So we got almost nowhere. And then the snowball started to roll, and we were successful in being able to pass a law. It was not a very effective law, to tell you the truth, although the legislator who carried it was incredibly impactful in her efforts. But basically what California law said, the first version, was that whatever the federal law is, we follow that. So that didn't help us very much. But in 2012, myself and another group of advocates led to an initiative being passed in California. As a matter of fact, the initiative was passed by more votes than any other initiative in the history of the initiative process, and was really to give definition, to give reality, and to give teeth to the crime of human trafficking. But I realized very early on that we needed to build collaborations in order to be effective. Again, there's no one person or one agency. We all have the ability to make a difference and to help someone by the way we interact with them, or how we handle ourselves if we're in the movement, but it's not for one person or one agency to solve. So I remember in 1997, I was a prosecutor. I headed the sexual assault unit here, which I had created for this office. And I had a case involving a 12-year-old girl who had been rescued out of a motel room. She was being raped. I will say the man was paid, a 50-year-old man paid to rape her. And the trafficker was 39 years old. And this little 12-year-old girl was so damaged by her relationship with that trafficker that she used to fight her mother just to get out of the house at night to go with the trafficker. And eventually her life ended very sadly. But in this particular case, when I sat down with her the first time and she started telling me about what she was doing and what it looked like and what her relationship was with the trafficker, frankly, I had done a lot of advocacy work, but I'd never heard of anything like that in my life. And she gave me a great education, this young woman. And that was in 1997. And again, we didn't even have a crime called human trafficking. So it was my mission then to make sure that our society, that our state, that our country was paying close attention. See if I can advance this. Is it advancing for you? Sorry.
It is not. I still see the main screen.
Okay, let me see how I can do that.
There we go.
Thank you. So, importantly, a lot of attention was given to this over the last couple of years. It's been about 20 years that the federal government has been working on human trafficking, but it's been focused mostly on immigrants who are being trafficked and brought to America. President Obama really captured it for me when he said, as you can see the quote, "I'm talking about injustice, the outrage of human trafficking, which must be called by its true name, modern slavery. It's barbaric and it's evil, and it has no place in a civilized world." And I could not agree with him more. In the United States, we have plenty of hotspots, although I will tell you that now the evidence is that every state now has reported cases of human trafficking, both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So there's no state, there's no community, there's no county or city that is immune from human trafficking. If anyone doubts that this crime exists, first let me tell you that it's estimated that 83% of trafficking victims in the United States, who are trafficked in the United States, are actually US citizens. We do have a lot of trafficking of individuals who are brought here from other countries, most on a legal visa, and then their visa is taken away or their passport's taken away, and then they're put into some form of slavery, either sex slavery or labor slavery, or sometimes both, as in the case of brothels. The California has its own hotspots, and Alameda County, the Bay Area, happens to be one of the 10 hotspots in the country, still identified by the FBI. And when I talk in a few minutes about the statistics we see, I think you'll understand why we are identified. Los Angeles obviously is a hotspot. It's a large population. San Diego and other parts of the state. And when I talk about that, we're talking about these hotspots are really about sex trafficking. But when you start looking at the Central Valley, that's when we start talking about labor trafficking in the agricultural world, particularly. So we wanted to really see what this looked like. So we did some research, and we have a full-time staff, both investigators and attorneys, that focus on these crimes. And we looked at a 124-hour period of advertising just in the city of Oakland. And I don't like to just zero in on Oakland, but we looked at Oakland. And certainly human trafficking is everywhere. In my county, we have a city down out in the eastern part of the county, and it's Livermore. And it's really, there's still cowboys out there doing cowboy stuff. They're working ranches, they're moving cattle. And Livermore was one of our biggest cases that came out of there, involving a group of high school girls, several high school girls that were trafficked. So I don't want to just focus on Oakland, but in this particular point, we looked at Oakland. We looked at online advertising. And what we found was that there were 1,165 postings in Oakland, in one East Bay city, Oakland. And that represented 750 unique profiles. And they were all female. And by our analytics, we could identify that they were mostly, overwhelmingly majority of minors. In 2019, we looked at the same time frame, and the postings were lower and the profiles were fewer, but it's still what we've seen is a 16.6% increase in this year. And I'm just dumbfounded by that, because we're in the time of COVID, and yet the online advertising and purchasing of people for sex for sale is increasing. And I just imagine with horror the amount of health issues that are attached to this, not just the psychological trauma, which is great, and the normal health concerns about, venereal disease or other sexually transmitted diseases or physical violence. But now we had COVID on top of that. So trafficking, we know, is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. And what we do know also is that billions of dollars are yielded annually through this means. Oops, sorry. Can you still see it?
Yes, and I think if you hit that little slideshow button at the bottom, it'll go back to full screen where it was. Oh, maybe not.
Let me make it there. Nope, now let me see. Sorry about that.
No, you're doing great. And if you go back to full screen, we can still see it all if you want to just have the
okay
view of them.
All right, apologies for that. Let's go back. This is like a little game show.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. So what I have on my screen now is the full thing. So let me get back. So trafficking, fastest growing enterprise, criminal enterprise.
I'm so sorry. I just want to let you know your notes are there too.
Yeah, let me see if I can make an adjustment here. Hold on one sec. I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second.
There's so much of old dogs learning new tricks right now with Zoom.
Seriously. Let me see. Well, none of them want to share. Oh, can you see it now?
Yes, I can. It's in presenter mode, so I can see what your next slide is.
Okay. Well, I'm going to escape out of this for a second and see if I can. Come on. Very sorry about this.
It happened in the last class I was in, so you're perfectly on par with that.
Okay, let me see if I can get us back up to me. I'm not getting any help with my computer today. Can you see me?
I can see you, which is great. And you know, Kenji he has your slides, so he could share them from his screen if you want.
That would be great.
Okay. So then if you just stop your screen share.
I think I did.
Perfect. So Kenji is sharing now. And can you see on your screen him pulling up slide number 7, the one that says sex trafficking and labor trafficking? It's just like you're doing an opening statement and you get objected to in the first 5 minutes and everyone has to run up to the judge.
Well, and of course, you know, we practiced like 3 times before to make sure that,
Exactly.
Since we live on the computer, I think we all have become accustomed to this. So Kenji, I will just let you know when to advance the next slide.
Okay, I am going to start sharing screen. I'm starting in number 7, slide 7, and just tell me to go to the next slide and I will keep proceeding.
Will do, thank you.
Kenji, you really have me on the edge of my seat here.
Just have to change it to the presentation mode.
There we go.
Here we go. Okay, so there's a little intermission. I'm just going to give a quick overview presentation of sex trafficking and labor trafficking. You can advance. Next slide. Next slide. It's estimated to be a $150 billion enterprise globally. And next, continue. There's some transitions. Go ahead. You can see here that the profit that's being made is primarily larger profit being made from labor trafficking. Next. And when we talk about sex trafficking, I never want us to forget that in the sex trafficking milieu, that the one who's funding it are the purchasers. Because if the purchasers, if there was no market and there wasn't a money exchange, then there would be no traffickers. They would find something else. What we saw several years back was that a lot of people that were trafficking in drugs, that they switched over to trafficking in human beings. Why? Because if once you sell your drugs, you're done. But you can sell a human being over and over and over during the course of a 24-hour period. Next slide. Some of the issues that become important to us is not just the financial accounting, but in that we did one study in San Diego, which is really one of the few studies that's been done on the real cost in California of human trafficking. And this study was published in 2018. And this study group looked at 11,773 sex traffickers in San Diego. Sorry, 11,773 victims. The industry was largely run by gangs. And what they discovered was that there was was an annual income of $810 million, which was $536,000 or $45,000 a month for the trafficker, trafficker. So it's a big money maker. And what we understand is, like, how does this happening? How can it be happening in America that we have sex trafficking of children particularly? Well, one of the reasons is because there's a lack of shared information between professionals and communities. And that directly affects the outcome for victims, especially when we're talking about children. I understand all the need for confidentiality, of course. And you know, when we bring cases into court, we bring them in as a Jane Doe or a John Doe. But as professionals, there's a lack of sharing between the professions. So we recently created a series of protocols for emergency departments at the hospitals. They had no protocol for identifying or treating somebody who's a victim of human trafficking. There was no communication between the agencies, between the police officer, the medical providers, the social service agencies, the victim advocate groups. So we really, that was one of the biggest problems that we saw, was this lack of shared information. And then also historically, and even till today, inadvertently, historically it was on purpose, but now inadvertently, victims or survivors are being arrested. And I know you heard a lot about this, and those of you that participated in an earlier presentation, that it is the victim who is being arrested while the exploiters and the purchasers are not. In California, the punishment for a trafficker can be pretty severe. The punishment for the purchaser is a misdemeanor, even if it's a minor. And the other part is that traffickers are mobile and they exist in the shadows. And oftentimes we see that traffickers are moving people from place to place. About 6 months ago, we had a case here. It was a woman who was charged with carjacking. And she did drive a car away with the owner in the back of it was a truck, owner in the back. And we charged her with carjacking. And then when we started digging deeper, we realized there was something not right about this case. And when I got involved in it, I figured out pretty quickly that she was a trafficked victim and that this guy was trafficking her and she was driving to get away. So instead of prosecuting her, we actually she was from Seattle. She'd been moved from Washington State to Las Vegas to Oakland. And we bought her a plane ticket, and we escorted her back to her family up in Washington State so that she could start her healing process. Next slide. So what we know about recruiting, we know that the internet has become a very, very dangerous place. And as you saw from the earlier statistics, that the internet has become a commonplace for advertising or selling individuals for sex. Next. We see also shopping malls, schools, bus depots and stops, parties, parks, and friends. Why we talk about this is because we want to make sure that people understand that this isn't something where people are being pulled into a dark alley. This is happening at our schools. It is happening in the shopping centers where kids congregate or where other people congregate, at the bus depots, for people that are traveling, or for many kids who are fleeing a home that they feel is not safe for them, that those are hotspots for recruiting or grabbing someone and then putting him into the sex trade or forced labor. Next. So what's an effective response, particularly to sex trafficking, and particularly I'll focus on children? And that is, next. What we came up with was Heat Watch, as Professor Moran said. It was frustrating to me that there were these little pockets of advocacy, or there were pockets of reaction, but it was not mainstream, and it certainly was not widespread. And people were sort of hovering and holding on to their little piece of the world of victimization. And so victims were not being served, and there were no resources available for them. And we had to be very concerted in our efforts and very mindful in our efforts to change that paradigm. We needed the country, we needed our state to recognize human trafficking and then to start to take action. So Heat Watch, as you heard, HEAT stands for Human Exploitation and Trafficking. The Heat Watch part of it came about because I view this as our form of neighborhood watch. So, you know, in neighborhood watch, neighbors watch out for each other. If they see somebody prowling around a neighbor's house, they call the police or they notify their neighbor. They take action. So they're the watchdog for neighborhoods. And that's the same thing that Heat Watch, we propose and we advocate for Heat Watch, that there's human trafficking going on all around us. And we need people to be the watchdogs. We need people to be the eyes and ears of what's happening with those who are being either lured into trafficking or who are vulnerable to being trafficked or are being trafficked. Next. Heat Watch is actually as you can see here, a 5-point community blueprint on how communities can come together and build their efforts to combat human trafficking. And as you heard in the introduction, that this has been passed on through the Department of Justice. It has been distributed across the country, and many communities have taken this framework to build their own. What they're actually doing may look different, but the framework is imperative for having an effective response to human trafficking. So the first prong of our blueprint, our community blueprint, is to train and engage law enforcement. Critically important, because oftentimes they're the first ones on the scene. They're the first responders, or they are the ones who are engaging with people, either traffickers or victims or the purchasers. If we're talking, I'm going to focus now on sex trafficking. And in the old days, law enforcement treated all people who were engaging in commercial sex as prostitutes. We never call children prostitutes. They may be prostituted, but they're never called prostitutes. But we needed to train law enforcement so they had an understanding of the victimization and not the perpetration. So to look at someone who's the most visible, the one who's standing on the street corner or the one who's advertised on the internet, that's the most visible person. But they are also the victim of this crime, not the perpetrator. So we've trained over 10,000 police officers now, and through the HEAT Institute, we created a statewide protocol for law enforcement that can be modified for their own counties or cities with their own phone numbers and resource information. But we gave them the manual, and we've done a lot of training to change their thought process from arrest to rescue or separate, because not all victims feel like they're being held in captivity. Not all victims see themselves as victims. Many see themselves as choosing to be with this person who is probably the most dangerous one in their life. The second prong is prosecute traffickers and support victims. So the number that we've just hit 805 prosecutions since I started the unit. Currently, we have 54 cases pending with even more victims than that. We have about 70 victims involved. The oldest victim is 43, and that's not old at all. The youngest victim that we have right now is 13 years old. So we spent a lot of time giving focus to prosecuting traffickers and prosecuting or holding accountable purchasers, and then supporting the victims. And I know you heard a lot about the changes in the law regarding that victims are not prosecuted for commercial sex. They're identified as victims, and there are a lot of resources that go along with being a victim of crime. Next. The next component is we had to engage the community-based organizations and the non-government organizations. Not everybody is going to embrace the police or the prosecution. And it was really important that we provide a lot of different avenues for a victim to reach out or to come into the fold, and community-based organizations, many of which now are being run by survivors. Missy is one particular agency that was one of the first in the country to, and for sure in California, run and started by a couple of women, one of whom is named Nola Brantley. She now has become a national trainer for people that work in the community and work in governments, agencies to appropriately respond to and support victims of human trafficking. Next. Next, please. I'll just keep going and hopefully you'll catch up with me. The fourth prong of our protocol, our community-based organization, our community-based protocol is to engage in policy development to change the laws and the resources. Now, remember, I started this whole thing before there was actually a law in California. And at the national level, the only focus that was being given to traffic victims were those who were from other countries. So we spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., spent a lot of time at the state capitol here in California. We passed a lot of laws that focus on enhancing the rights of and protections for victims of human trafficking, including that juveniles could not be arrested for commercial sex, period. That the Department of Social Services, irrespective of the circumstances, if the child was identified as a traffic victim, that they were entitled to the resources of the government that flow through social services. We were able to get a lot of federal funding. And you know, from a policy standpoint, the first step is to change the policies. The second step is to have the resources flow after the policies have been put into practice. And that's a lot of what we've been doing. In 2012, as I shared with you at the beginning, in 2005, we passed a law that basically said, well, whatever the feds are doing, we'll do. But in 2012, because we could not get laws passed in California that were stronger than the original human trafficking law, we took it to the voters. We created an initiative, and it was Proposition 35. It was passed, as I said, by more votes than any other initiative in the history of the state. And it really gave teeth to the crime of human trafficking. It identified it, first of all. A lot of trafficking that goes on, as you've learned over the last series of this program, a lot of trafficking is done through coercive treatment and coercive tactics. So people who are being coerced are oftentimes the last one to figure out that they have been a victim of coercion. And so we really changed the law to accurately reflect the crime of human trafficking. And importantly, we also increased punishment for people who are holding others in slavery, basically. And then we passed a law that said that there are 13 different types of organizations and businesses, transit centers, massage parlors, medical facilities, the hotels and motels. There's 13 we wrote into the law. And every one of those are required to post a poster that identifies the components of human trafficking with the resource numbers for people to be able to reach out. It's not enforced universally. We have an app that's called MAP 1193 because the bill was SB 1193. So that's one where we have a law, but we haven't seen universal enforcement of it, so that anybody can go into a bathroom in any of these businesses, or be waiting for the BART train, or be sitting in an emergency department and be able to see a sign that says, this is what human trafficking looks like. And then to myself, I could say, wow, that could be me. Or am I sitting here saying, well, my neighbors has a person who works for them, never comes out of the house. And it's a way for us to be able to open the eyes of people and take action. And then the last component of Heat Watch is to engage and educate the community. And this has probably been one of the most important components of our efforts. Next slide. This is what a coordinated response looks like in my county and what we advocate for all counties. That we have, of course, the district attorney, advocacy services, critically important, probation, law enforcement. And what's important about having law enforcement is that they do have ability that they can arrest the traffickers and the perpetrators. But also when we involve our advocacy partners, that for many victims, they've been told by the trafficker that the police are going to take them to jail. And in the old days, that happened. The traffickers went free, but victims were the ones that were being put in jail or being put in juvenile hall. And we still have victims of human trafficking who are in state prisons across this country that committed a crime under the duress of human trafficking. And so I know you heard about the vacature laws that are going on now, which we've been very supportive of, and we're partners in the legislation. Social services, especially involving children, critically important to provide vital resources and funding. The community service providers, our mental health service providers. Through the HEAT Institute, we also have created a treatise for professionals, and those professionals are able to develop an expertise in working with trafficked victims. Because you think about it, a trafficked victim is a victim of human trafficking, of slavery. They're a victim of sexual assault. They're a victim of domestic violence by the trafficker, who oftentimes will turn to violence to keep somebody under their control. And these are all very complicated mental health issues. And so we need mental health professionals that can understand that myriad of trauma to be able to help that individual begin to heal and move beyond their trafficking experience. Of course, the defense attorney and private lawyers, the schools, critically important. We've got some initiatives I'll talk about, and then all the partners to law enforcement. Next slide, please. So one of the areas where we've given a lot of focus is supporting and growing system-based advocacy. The systems, oftentimes, nonprofits are always fundraise, and right now we have an initiative going on to support survivors by supporting the agencies, the non-government agencies that provide services to them. But for sure, the government, no matter what they say, I mean, nobody is just tons and tons of money, but it's all a matter of priority. It's a matter of priority how government agencies spend their money. And so one of the things that we put to the court was we need a gender-specific courtroom for girls who are being trafficked. And they might be in juvenile hall, they might be in jail for crimes that weren't associated with human trafficking, but nevertheless, we identify them as someone who's being trafficked or is at risk for being trafficked. Next. We created the Young Women's Empowerment Program. This is a 16-week program that goes through, and we usually cap it at 12 young women. And it goes through from the first month about just the emotional aspects of not human trafficking, but of circumstances that made someone vulnerable to trafficking, living in a household where there was abuse and sexual abuse quite often, having physical abuse, having a family that doesn't demonstrate love to them, sort of being a throwaway, and I put that in quotes, or many foster kids. The foster system for a long time was a very dangerous place for human trafficking. So the Young Women's Empowerment Program really gets to the heart of some of those. But then by the end, it's about financial literacy and about how someone can move on. They can make their own money. They don't have to rely on someone else for money. And also how to prepare to go into a more mainstream line of work to be able to make money. Next. Safety net has become another critical component of this comprehensive collaborative effort to address human trafficking. Safety net I started in 2011. To date, we have done over 7,000 safety plans for minors and young adults. It's a group of professionals who come together every week. We will sometimes invite someone in, but it's all generally the core group. And we talk about between 17 and 20 young people every week who are either being trafficked or at risk for being trafficked, that people refer them to us from the public defender's office, from the courts, from the schools, from the streets, from the police. So it's a myriad of referrals. And what we do is we identify who's the best person to link up with the child, with that young person. And secondly, what are the needs? What do we need to do? What can we do to help that person either get away from the trafficker or to stay away from traffickers? Next. This CSEC identification tool was created by West Coast Children's Counseling Center, which is one of our partners, and here in Alameda County. But this identification tool is for professionals, so that if somebody is doing an intake of someone at the hospital, for instance, that they've been trained for this identification tool to be able to identify whether somebody is being trafficked or is at risk for being trafficked. It's been used universally. Probation departments use it. A lot of community-based organizations use it. And it's really instrumental so that we don't overlook, because of our lack of knowledge or our ignorance, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but our ignorance of certain components, that we don't overlook somebody who is right in front of us who's a victim of human trafficking. Next. Dreamcatcher is one of our local shelters. It started as a shelter for homeless youth. We have a certain segment carved out that's called Nika's Place. Nika was a very strong advocate for trafficked individuals, young adults, and she was tragically killed in a car accident. She ran Dreamcatcher for years. And so we carved out a section of Dreamcatcher that's for trafficked individuals. But this is a 21-day stay at the most, and we see a lot of people cycling through. Next. Claire's House is it's a particular house for minor girls who have been trafficked. It is located in Oakland. It's a wonderful place. Where Claire's House came about was that I reached out to all the faith leaders in the county and said, basically, where are you? Where are you in the human trafficking movement, the anti-trafficking movement? You're supposed to help people, feed the hungry, house the homeless. Where are you, faith community? And when I met with the bishop, who's the bishop of the diocese here in Oakland and both Alameda and Contra Costa County, I said to him, I, as a Catholic background, I said, I know you have convents and you don't have nuns. They're all living in apartments. And I know you have priests, that not that many anymore. So you must have rectories or convents. And I need real estate to be able to create some housing for when somebody separates away from a trafficker. Because the truth is, if we don't replace the basic necessities of life, when we remove them from the worst person in their world, but is providing them necessities like housing and food and clothes, if we don't have something to substitute, then we're failing them. And so the bishop turned over a rectory, which we converted into a house. It's a short-term therapeutic house. So it's comprehensive. It helps with the young residents recover from their trauma. It helps them getting back into school or getting back into an education platform so that they can graduate and then go on to having an independent and full life. Next one. And then we've done a huge amount in school-based education and awareness. We did pass a law that said every 5th, 7th, 9th, and 11th grader has to have a class on human trafficking. And so there's an organization that we've contracted with to provide that training for both the teachers and the students. The teachers are important because they're oftentimes the ones who are seeing behaviors that are out of sorts, or they're seeing absenteeism. Many of the referrals we get to Safety Net come from teachers who are concerned about a student. And so the educating students at the 5th grade level, we're not talking necessarily about human trafficking, but we're talking about choice and bullying and not succumbing to someone's pressure. We're talking in more general terms. When we start getting into the 7th, 9th, and 11th graders, it's really quite specific about what human trafficking is. And many of those youth become our advocates also. They become the one who can see what's going on when a teacher or another responsible adult might not ever see it or might not know what they're seeing. There's a situation in San Diego years ago where a school, the special ed children at the school were being trafficked by a group of students. And the teachers knew that something was going on. I think some of them thought they were going around the corner doing drugs or whatever, but no one ever figured out that it was human trafficking. And these poor kids with special needs were being trafficked during the lunch hour and during certain periods. The school, to its credit, once they figured it out, they became the strongest advocate for school-based awareness and training. And we also have created a graphic novel, what I used to call a comic book when I was young, but a graphic novel that kind of follows the story of a girl who runs away from her house because her mother's boyfriend is messing with her. Not an uncommon situation for trafficked kids. and then what her plight looks like and how she eventually can get out of human trafficking. So really important to bring awareness at our school level. Next. And then the last part, as we talked about, was this engaging the community. And I have to say that this is one part where we can never do enough. So the goals of engagement with the community are educating them. They are sensitizing people to human trafficking. When I first started doing this work and I go out to community events and I start talking about human trafficking, people would say, first, I don't know what you're talking about. Are you talking about those prostitutes that are over on 27th Street? And I correct them politely. They're not prostitutes, they're people and children, and many of them are being trafficked. Some might be sex workers making that choice. But you know, on that point, that we have a diversion program for women who are caught up in the commercial sex trade. And instead of prosecuting them, they can go to this program that we fund. And we asked those women if they'd be willing to be part of a study for us. And those that agreed participated. We had quite a few, like over 100 people, 100 women who are willing to participate in our research. And the one universal discovery that we made, which was not a surprise to us, was that a majority of those women were trafficked when they were children, way before there were laws, when they were 12, 13, 14. Maybe for some and this was also sadly not a uniquely uncommon experience, that they were being traded by their family members for drugs. So they were given over for sex in exchange for drugs, that, you know, they were being molested by a parent. And so there were a lot of very sad stories and about their childhood, but an overwhelming majority, their experience in commercial sex started as trafficking victims. And without ever being able to heal from that experience, without ever being able to feel that they were respected or they deserved respect in our society, because we didn't give it to people who were involved in commercial sex, whether they were a traffic victim or not. So engagement of the community became really pivotal to our efforts to combat human trafficking. The next area was we had to mobilize people. We needed people to not just say, wow, that's a terrible story, thank you for sharing it. We needed people to say, what can I do? What can I do? Can I go with a group out on the street and, you know, hand out leaflets? Can I put up the posters in all the various businesses? Can I become a speaker and talk to all these different groups? Can I raise money? Can I give money to the organizations that are helping to the recovery and you know, the resilience of those that were caught up in human trafficking? So the mobilization, this is not just about, oh, that's really interesting. The mobilization factor is really key to being able to combat human trafficking. Next. We needed all of our community, not just a handful of us that are abolitionists, but we needed all of our community to be advocates against human trafficking and for the protection and resources of victims and survivors. Next. And then importantly, we needed to build our partnerships. So we needed, this goes back to the issue around lack of shared information between different agencies. What we really have created here, and we needed to create here and should be across the state, is that agencies cannot hold on to a victim that they're serving, because that agency might serve a very critical purpose at that moment in time. But there are so many areas where survivors need help. And so we have to have these partnerships, these comprehensive partnerships that allow us to really serve the whole person and not just the little corner of that person that we know about. In my office, we have partnerships with many agencies. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, who provide a myriad of services. You were, I think one of your speakers was from Justice at Last, and they're a big partner to ours because we are right there with them in making sure that we're getting rid of these old convictions that the person acquired while they were being trafficked or as a result of human trafficking. So partnerships are key. And I hope that for all of you that are here that are interested in this subject, that you too are partners in this battle to end human trafficking. Next. Because in reality, until the communities say we will not accept this anymore, no more human trafficking, we're going to continue having it. We have to make it so intolerable for those that are trafficking. We have to make it so difficult for those that are trying to traffic, and also for the purchasers. You know, the purchasers get off pretty easy in this whole area of human trafficking involving this commercial sex trade. The purchasers are barely punished. They're oftentimes not even identified by law enforcement, so they could be arrested and brought into the court system. Through the HEAT Institute, which I'll talk about in just a second, very briefly, we did a series of hearings around the state of California. I had a commission of 18 leaders in the state of California, including the Chief Justice. We had the head of social services. We had the Attorney General, Kamala Harris, who started her career here in this office. And we did a series of hearings. And across the state, every hearing we did, we brought in a panel of former purchasers to talk about what motivated them and what did they do to stop. So very interesting, but we cannot let purchasers off the hook. So all of our community has to come together and say, we're done with this human trafficking. We have got to stop this. Next, please. So how can we best educate, stimulate, and engage our community? Well, we can do a lot of public speaking, of course, but that only hits the audience that is in the room at the time or is watching on a Zoom meeting. So we figured out that we needed to do a lot more. We needed to really take charge and make our message universal. So as you all know, January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. January 11 is Human Trafficking Awareness Day. And that was created by the federal government, but we have extended it to be the whole month. So for the last 10 years or so, we've had a billboard and bus shelter campaign. And what we found was through those campaigns that for people coming from the East Bay, going into San Francisco, people going from the south of the county, north, people going through Sacramento, that 42 million sets of eyes looked at our billboard with our messaging about human trafficking. That's a lot. Those are a lot of set of eyes. And at least it wasn't to those people. They could see and know not only the term human trafficking, which I think a lot of people, most people know now, but the depth behind human trafficking, what it really represents. So we do bus shelters and billboards. Next. We do, of course, community presentations. Next. And we go to schools and we engage the youth. There's a project initiative that I became aware of, meeting an artist in New York. We met in DC when I was doing a presentation about human trafficking, and she was an artist from New York, and she had done this art project around red sand, like red sand that's red. And so after we were talking, and she said, I have an initiative for you, a project, and it's called the Red Sand Project. And we engage high school kids to be involved in this. So they take red sand and they go to the local where people go shopping. We're not doing it now, of course, but when people go to malls or people go to shopping centers, outdoor malls especially, like Walnut Creek or San Francisco or around Alameda County, and they would put the red sand in the cracks. And when people would say, "What's that? What's the story with the red sand?" the kids could then explain to them about human trafficking. And it's a way to get the energy of that youth to be abolitionists and not just sitting on the sideline kind of watching this all happen. Next slide. And then, of course, we urge, this year our campaign slogan is, we are urging people in our community to support the organizations that are working with traffic victims and survivors. Next slide. So this is our billboard campaign this year. We also won a national award for this piece of art. It's actually about 4 feet wide and about 6 feet high. and it's hanging out in the entryway of my office up here. The federal government has had this human trafficking division for 20 years. So they really wanted to celebrate resiliency, even though we still have a lot of people living in slavery. They wanted to highlight resiliency. And we wanted to, with our art, we wanted to inspire those who are being trafficked, that there is another side to this, that there is life on the other side. And so you can see our slogan, which says, no winter lasts forever, no spring skips its turn. And that means there's always a chance for somebody to separate away from a trafficker and move on with their life with a lot of support, with a lot of help, with a lot of love and caring. But that possibility is always there for someone. And you can see at the bottom that the image starts with chains and it turns into flowers. And the flowers really represent life and growth and hope, hopefulness in the way she's looking up to the sky. So we won the national competition, and now this is our billboard campaign. And we are now talking about making posters and also postcards to, and then for the effort, to further the effort. Next. This is our bus shelter this year. And these are our bus shelters all over Alameda County, and we believe they will be on buses in Contra Costa County as well. So it just sort of puts it right there. You know, this is not just a term. This is not just something that happens somewhere else. Here, 1,000 ads, over 1,000 ads selling young women for children in Alameda County. I want to shock people. And I use these statistics a little bit to shock people because we have to shake people out of their comfort zone. I was at a dinner once, and there was a group of women, and one of them had seen me give a talk about this, and they all had actually, they'd all talked about it, heard me talk about it. And they started to talk, oh, I saw Nancy O'Malley speak on human trafficking. And the woman had said, one of them said, you know, that human trafficking thing, that doesn't really happen in my area. And they looked at her and they said, are you kidding? Human trafficking is everywhere. And I sat back and said, wow, yay, I applauded them because they got the message. Now they were the advocates. And I'm going to talk about in just a second about Take the Pledge. And I hope all of you will take the pledge. But this is on all the bus shelters to get people to mobilize. Again, next, please. This was our first campaign. And there were a series of slogans. We had, there's no such thing as a child prostitute. We were the first ones to use that. Buying a team for sex is child abuse, turning a blind eye is neglect. And that's really my statement to government agencies and responsible adults who have the ability to see something and to do something, but don't. Next one. This year we focused on schools and how dangerous some schools have become because traffickers are lurking around and purchasers are lurking around schools, high schools, and even middle schools. So there's here no such thing as a child prostitute. Next. They're not Johns, they are child rapists. Now people know me that I never use that term John to refer to someone who's a purchaser. And the reason is, well, I did a little research, like where did that name even come from anyway? Well, in years and years and years ago, when there were women that were working on the streets, that if a police officer came by and the woman was loitering, that if she said, oh, I'm waiting for John, and this is the folklore, the cop's mind, oh, well, John's a nice guy name, so it must be a nice guy she's waiting for. And it kind of evolved into this term. Well, I say, I'm married to a guy named John, and I have a brother named John, and I have a lot of good friends named John, so I don't ever use the term John when I'm talking about someone who is purchasing a person for sex. And I hope you will not either. But we really wanted to let people know, like the punishment for purchasers is so light that we wanted the community to know that they're not Johns. Don't give them a walk by calling them by a nice guy name. They're child rapists because that's what they're doing. They're paying to rape a child. Next. Now, the other thing that we've done to expand and continue our efforts is that we created Alameda County United Against Human Trafficking. So you can see again, we bring in every industry that we can find that may have or has something to do or a service to provide to a person who's being trafficked. And we come together so that we don't have the cracks that, like the red sand, that we don't want vulnerable people falling through the cracks. We want to work collaboratively, and we want to work together to be able to support traffic victims. And if we as a community can't do that, then we are failing both the victim survivor, but we're also failing our community. Next, please. So here's the pledge. This was our campaign that began last year. And, you know, we talked about earlier that I do a lot in Sacramento. I do a lot in the Washington, D.C. to really bring attention and more importantly, to bring resources to this field for organizations, for advocates, for lawyers who are helping to do vacatures, for housing, for all the needs that there are for someone who's separating away from a trafficker. But when I go back there, they say, oh yeah, there's Nancy O'Malley. She's really involved in human trafficking. And there's, I'm sure many of you are identified as being advocates or abolitionists against human trafficking. But what I really want to do is I want to go back with a million clicks, we're calling it, 1 million clicks or 2 million clicks. Because when we go back there and say, this is not just a group of advocates and abolitionists that are combating human trafficking and trying to change the paradigm. This is our society. These are people that care about what's happening to men, women, children, both in sex trafficking and in labor trafficking. And we bring that volume of response and people who have pledged to join us in to end human trafficking so that we can really increase the amount of resources, because the need is great. The need is overwhelmingly great. And so if any of you decide you want to take the pledge, we don't track email addresses or phone numbers if you do it through text, but if you go to heatwatch.org and just click on the pledge, that's the end of it. And we're just counting pledges. So next. And what the pledge says is, I pledge to stand with my community to combat human trafficking in all forms. It's in Spanish, it's being translated into other languages. That's clicking the box is anonymous, no personal information is being gathered. And we really want all of our communities to join the fight against human trafficking, because together we will end human trafficking. Next. So you can just go through this one. These, again, we talked about this earlier. These are people that are critically important to the efforts to end human trafficking. Next. And then one of the areas where we have really put focus on is we have to make sure law enforcement is appropriately trained. We advocate that there be an advocate present if there's someone who is involved both in the commercial sex or someone who's being trafficked. So we've done a huge amount of effort around the Bay Area, around the state, to train law enforcement specifically through this Bay Area Heat Coalition. Next. And then last, the Heat Institute, which I talked a little bit about. I was able to create this with the James Irvine Foundation Award. And as I said, we had an 18 very distinguished panel of commissioners. We did 7 public hearings up and down the state. We started in San Diego. We ended up in Shasta County. We had over, I think it was 5,000 people participated. We got educated, and we educated community. And it was all done by panelists giving us information. We were able to do a fishbowl where we sat on the outside, and we were able to observe a group of girls who had been trafficked and watch them talk. They had questions that were being put to them by the moderator, and we were able to listen to them without them feeling like we were staring at them or that they were talking to us. Like I said, we had former purchasers, we had mental health professionals, we had tech people to talk about how dangerous the internet can be and what we can do to stop it. So it was very meaningful. And from that, we've written a lot of material for people. We have created these protocols for hospitals, for emergency rooms, especially. Children's Hospital in Oakland, which is the regional hospital for children, did not have a protocol for addressing human trafficking. Highland Hospital here in Oakland did not have a protocol. So now they do. And so that's really the focus of the HEAT Institute, is to dive deeper, to do more research, and then to come up with protocols or with solutions on how we can train professionals or engage our community to stop human trafficking. So with that, I think I am done talking. I hope you have some questions. And thank you so much for your attention. And really, thank you for paying attention to this issue altogether.
Thank you so much, DA O'Malley, for educating us and for inspiring us. I hope that you're not mad that I did multitask and took the pledge while you were talking. I'm sure many of our 131 attendees will do the same. I think everyone here is able to see just like what a force of nature DA O'Malley is. There wasn't a law, so she made a law. And then the law wasn't followed, and so she executed the law. And then we needed a full community response and to connect everyone. And so she created Heat Watch. I mean, it's just incredible. So there have been a lot of questions. And if you're ready, I want to give you a chance to have some water and everything. Okay. And thank you, Kenji, by the way, for helping us figure out that tech issue.
Yes.
And Megan O'Day for getting such an amazing speaker to finish off this series and to give us such a full picture of what it looks like to care for victims of human trafficking and to prosecute offenders of it in the Bay Area. So, DA O'Malley, one of the things you brought up are the unique challenges that COVID has brought to this all. And I know, and I'm sure that you've seen a lot of crimes committed in private have increased during COVID. Domestic violence crimes have spiked. As you identified this 24-hour period that you compared year to year, you saw a dramatic spike. So what unique challenges are there to investigating and prosecuting human traffickers during this time period that we're living in now?
Well, the people that are actually placing the ads are hidden in plain sight, really. So it takes, it really takes a lot of technical knowledge to be able to trail, to follow where the ad's being placed, and then to identify who's placing it. About 2 years ago, Backpage, which was the premier nasty site, that they were able to, the federal government went after them and they were able to shut it down. Senator Dianne Feinstein really led the charge on that. She also led the charge. Craigslist used to be a haven for human trafficking advertising. She led the fight to take it off of Craigslist also. So what it takes is it takes trained investigators, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes patience. Because we have to figure out how to get to them and where they're physically located. But it's not impossible. And the other part of that is that we do have decoys. So for a while, we had our own website where somebody who's searching for a minor would go to. And when it came up on the screen, it would say, "You've reached the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. And we know who you are because we have your IP address." And I tell you, some of those people would click to the next screen, like, "Oh, okay, nice introduction. Now where's the image I'm looking for?" So we use that to contact people directly, purchasers primarily. So it just takes a lot of work. But the other part of it is that we, during COVID, that we were out on the streets. One of our survivor abolitionists, she's awesome. Her name is Regina Evans, and she's an artist also. And she was part of my team. She, myself, and the artist did that beautiful artwork. That she was building altars out there, and by altars I mean, structures. And we had flowers, and we had food, and we had water, and then we wrote in the sidewalk in chalk messages to the victims to say, "You're not alone. We're here. We're there for you. COVID is here." And so we did a lot of that. But I think there's no question that so much has been driven behind closed doors. And most of it is just getting the message out that we're here and we are enforcing, and we will, if we can find you, we're going to prosecute you.
Okay, and speaking of prosecuting, so USF is a school that produces a lot of public defenders, but you would be amazed at how many questions in the chat were about how can we make sure we're increasing prosecution and and some sort of punishment for purchasers. So you mentioned earlier that it's only a misdemeanor, at least for a first offense for a purchaser. So is there anything sort of in the pipeline in this sense where we can more aggressively go after those people?
Well, I have had, I think it's been on three different legislative cycles, a bill that would, there's actually a crime that we commonly called luring, and it's a crime that if you lure a child out to kidnap them, to molest them, that it's a felony crime. And so the legislation that I proposed would have added human trafficking to that. So if you're the purchaser who's trying to lure a child, someone you know as a child, for purposes of commercial sex, that you could be charged with that particular crime. It's difficult in terms of separating out human trafficking from commercial sex, from sex workers. And, I think that that's one of the fine lines from a legislative perspective of being able to understand who is choosing on some conscious choice to be a sex worker versus somebody who's by circumstance or by a trafficker luring them or threatening them or whatever. It's hard to make that distinction, but we do. We do that all the time. And so the purchasers, I just feel like we just have a lot of work to do with that side of it. I am also on the California Sex Offender Management Board. I chair it actually. And we have added human trafficking to the realm of sex offenders and how we can effectively engage sex offenders through treatment, through supervision if that's necessary, but through treatment particularly to stop or address their issues that draw them to purchase someone for sex. But I particularly focus on if you're talking about a young adult, 24 or under, particularly a child. That's where I really, and by child I mean, the youngest child we've dealt with is 11. So I really focus on that group in terms of someone who's lurking and looking for a minor. They do fall under the umbrella of a pedophile. So.
And so, one of the things I've heard you talking about is engaging the community in this all. Do you see that as sort of the biggest way that we reduce the demand and we reduce what purchasers are looking for in this, or is there another part of that equation?
I think that on the demand, I've looked at this a lot, because some communities, what they would do is if somebody was arrested for, generally men, if a man was arrested for soliciting, even if it was a minor, they would put his picture on a billboard, or they'd put the picture on their police, their webpage. These are the people that are trying to buy children for sex. But in one of the hearings that we had with the Heat Institute, a young woman testified on the purchaser panel, and her father was a purchaser. And he had been like an upstanding guy in the community. He was very involved in their church and all, she gave the whole history. And then, and pornography plays a big role in all of this. We have to deal with pornography too. But what she said was, when my father got arrested and it got published, it didn't just go after him. It went after me too. My mother, people, I go to school and people were looking at me because they could see my dad's picture on a billboard. So I do not promote that because I don't want it to hurt the whole family. I want to address that person. And I think that we just have to make stronger laws. I'm not as concerned especially if it's an adult, I'm not as concerned with conviction, but I am concerned with, or I would like our ability to sit down and give some input, empathy, do restorative justice, do something like that, so that these people understand, these men that are trolling understand that they're actually buying a human being, and that person may be trafficked. So.
And one thing I hear you talking about a lot in your talk and in your answers is listening to past victims, past purchasers, and getting a lot of information before you're going in and, cowboys, guns blazing, what do I do about this? And I know a huge part of that has to do with the Heat Institute. So how important is it to go through these case studies and to hear from actual victims, actual purchasers when it comes to addressing the causes and finding the solutions?
We can't do it with, we can't from where we sit. If we've never been in that situation, then we really can't understand the depth of the trauma and the depth of that, what that relationship looks like. When I first got involved in this, people would say, like I said, oh, is that little teenage prostitute down there? Until we started talking about what human trafficking is. And so we are better. Our policies are better when we are hearing from survivors. And the stories are eerily common, not universally, but it's scary how we keep hearing the same thing over and over again from so many kids, now adults. But we also have some wonderful survivors who have become great. They've done great things in our community. We have lawyers, we have doctors. We have, when I had this idea of having a cocktail party with community, and then everybody's mingling. And then at the end, we say, okay, now anybody who's a survivor of human trafficking, step forward. And everybody in that room would be shocked and dumbfounded by this woman they were just talking to, or the man they were just talking to, who is a survivor. They would have no idea. And so that's what I think is also so important for the resiliency, to help victims and survivors to understand that there are people that have gone through what they're going through, or what they've gone through, and that they have gone on to do great things, or gone on to just have a peaceful life, got married, had children, things like that.
And it sounds like one of the things you're talking about right now are common misconceptions about how common and prevalent this is. One thing you said in your talk was someone saying, this doesn't happen in my community, or just us not being able to know by looking at someone, what they've been through. So what would you say, if not that, is the most common misconception in the community about human trafficking?
I think the most common misconception is that that people that we have identified as victims of human trafficking are in fact choosing to be there. They're choosing to be sold on the internet. They're choosing to stand on some street and have male after male after male purchase them, multiple sex partners. I think that, for that's probably the most common, this separating out choosing from distress and coercion and exploitation.
And so that sort of dovetails into a question that we got about training of officers. You said a huge part of this has just been informing police of, hey, your expectation when you go in before was to arrest what you saw as a prostitute, instead of looking at what's the bigger picture and providing protection to that victim. So one of the questions we got was, what does the training of those police officers look like? And is that something that is an additional training, or is that now something that we're bringing in when they go through the initial academy?
So now it's part of the academy. And I think that it's probably now been about 6 years that has been mandatory training for all law enforcement in California. And how we train them is we bring survivors in. It's not the full training, but we talk about the laws, we talk about the dynamics, we talk like we're doing now, but then we bring in the voice of survivors and let the police officers really understand from their humanity what's happened to this person, or what human trafficking really looks like and what the impact looks like. And the other part that's been really important is linking law enforcement with advocate groups. So we have street outreach workers. We have, if they're going out and we know they're going to focus on a particular area, we have our victim advocates ready. We have the Family Justice Center you talked about. And we bring them to the Family Justice Center to sort of debrief. And so the police get a lot of support from should accept and ask for a lot of support from the advocacy groups and the community members.
You were saying that one of the biggest misconceptions is that victims choose to stay in this, or that it's their choice to initially be in it. How much does the cycle of violence, how much does providing or forcing of using drugs or other things play into a trafficker's ability to keep a victim trafficked?
So not uncommon is that the trafficker will become friendly with the individual, and that sort of this quasi-romantic, flirty, friendly, I can help you, I can take care of you, and then that, and for many of the victims, they come into this in a very vulnerable state. Like I said, we have a high percentage of, in our studies, we see a high percentage of young people that have run away from their own home. They haven't had stability in their home. They've been molested in their home. An overwhelming majority have been previously molested or abused. And so you get someone who's sweet talking you and wants to protect you and wants to provide for you. And then that can become, that coercion, subtle coercion can become more directed. Hey, can you do this for me? I'll take care of you. And then, get them, maybe they have other women that are involved who are sort of educating the victim, which talk about a conflict for that other woman to now realize that they are now contributing to the exploitation. But eventually, if somebody says, I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm sick, I don't, whatever, then we see violence. And the violence has gotten much worse. And the violence that we're seeing during COVID is not only violence from the traffickers, but violence from the women and the girls that are on the street themselves. A lot of traffic right now from LA area up to here, and very dangerous. But it's, once somebody has got you in their spell, so to speak, once they have lured you into that sense of protectiveness, then they can, that's how they push someone into that. And then violence becomes a part of it. If someone tries to leave, or if they don't want to go out on the street or on the internet, then we've seen gang rapes, we've seen burning, we've seen a lot of bruising, things like that.
One of the questions that we were asked is in the chat is, what if someone were, knowing only what they've learned from this talk, were, walking down the street and suspected someone might be a victim of trafficking, what are the things they might look for that would indicate to them, hey, this could be a trafficking situation, and what should they do if they see that?
Well, the first thing is what draws my eye still is if I see someone that's just standing on the street in front of a store, or now what we're seeing more because the police are driving up and down the streets, is that they're going into the neighborhoods. So if you see someone who's just loitering, and in the old days, the images that were portrayed with somebody in a mini skirt, like a crop top, high heels. Well, now we see people in jeans and a sweater and a jacket, so that you can't use clothing as an indicator. And so what I do is I watch. I mean, I've done this myself. I've had people call me even from LA. One call I got, the guy said, I'm sitting outside McDonald's and I'm sitting next to like 2 tables away from this weird situation. And the guy is obviously pressuring this girl, and she's young and she doesn't want it. You can tell the body language. What should I do? And I said, well, there's a couple things. You can call the police, hope that they show up, or you can call the hotline and report it. Or, we're now doing things like we're figuring out ways to do a communication like a nail card. Hey, if you want to get your nails done, here's a place to get your nails done. And in fact, it's us. And I know a couple counties have done that. So there are a lot of different ways of trying to communicate. But that's also one reason to put those signs up, those businesses, so that not only does what I see, these are some of the indicators of human trafficking, but the survivor victim sees it too.
So it's sort of going along those lines, if someone sees something and thinks that it's trafficking, that's sort of one way they can help. Another question we're getting a lot from people is, how can people get involved and help outside of becoming a district attorney? So can they donate time? Can they go and help in the schools with educating on things? Is there pro bono work to be done in this? Can they donate to community organizations?
Well, I would say all of the above. Probably not the school so much because, well, one is COVID, but also because we do have this, at least in this county, but every county, every school in California is required now, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th graders. We happen to be, we're pushing it forward. But one way is really to find those agencies in your community that are doing good work, that are providing resources. And by that, I mean, some that are providing housing, they're providing advocacy, they're providing shelter, and research them though, make sure that they're legitimate, and you can donate to that, because all of these nonprofit organizations are never going to have enough money. And so that's one way of doing it, but also volunteering. So there are a lot of opportunities to volunteer working at a shelter. And one of our Dreamcatcher, which I talked about, we make food. So, you know, once a week we bring food over to feed everybody there. Some of them are being trafficked, some of them are just homeless youth. I don't mean it that way, but some are homeless youth. So we bring over food. And, you know, I think that really understanding who is doing the work in their community and seeing what their needs are and helping them either as a volunteer, as a mentor, you know, as these victims come out of the trafficking environment, then we really look for the, you know, the mentorship, or the, what I call our support, our peer support. So, you know, we have a lot of younger women who are willing to be the buddy to the survivor until she gets on her feet or he gets on his feet. So there are a lot of agencies, thank goodness now, that are really focused on addressing human trafficking, and that's a place where they can always use help.
Well, thank you so much. It is 1:28. We were told to turn this over at 1:25. So you've provided us with so many inspiring messages of hope and with ways that we can each contribute. Is there anything else that you want to say before I turn things back to Megan O'Day?
The only thing I want to say is to all of you that are here to learn and have gone through the series, then thank you, first of all, to USF, to you, Professor Moran, to Megan, and Kenji, especially for his technical support. But to everybody who's participated in this series, I thank you. Because the more people, I mean, at some point, we're going to change the paradigm of people that are abolitionists versus someone who's got their head in the sand or just doesn't know about it. And you now are advocates, and you're now educators, and you're now the people who can engage your community. And thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much, D.A. O'Malley.
Thank you, Professor Moran, and a huge heartfelt thank you to Nancy O'Malley for an incredibly informative and inspiring keynote address. I just want to take a few minutes to close out our 2021 symposium, Exploitation to Empowerment, Leveraging the Law for Survivors of Human Trafficking. Whether you've attended 1, 2, or all 3 of our webinars, I want to thank you all for taking the time on your Friday afternoons to learn more about what human trafficking is, how technology is used to both help and hinder victims, what civil remedies are available to survivors, and how that trauma affects the victim's experience of accessing justice. And finally, I know we have attendees from all over the country, but for those of us who are in the Bay Area, we just heard today about this top of the line, nationally recognized human trafficking prosecution unit, an all-encompassing approach to fighting human trafficking in our backyard, Alameda County, by one of my personal heroes, Nancy O'Malley. I want to express thanks to a few people who have made this symposium possible. First of all, the Law Review Volume 55 Board and our symposium advisor, Professor Connie De La Vega, who have supported my work and vision since early last summer. I want to thank family and friends, particularly my boyfriend, for letting me bounce ideas off of them and listening to symposium and human trafficking talk nonstop for the past 6 months. And of course, I want to thank all the speakers for sharing their time and expertise, and our faculty moderators for their time and efforts in preparing for these events. And last but in no way least, my partner in crime, Kenji Kiyano, who has always been 3 steps ahead of me, who I've been exchanging emails with multiple times a day for months, who has been the liaison between myself and the speakers, moderators, and audience members, and who has completely supported my vision since day one. This event would not have happened without you, Kenji. So thank you everyone for coming. I hope you learned something and you leave feeling empowered to become involved in some way, or to reach across the aisle and collaborate among agencies, because human trafficking is a beast, but I believe we can make a real impact on our communities by joining together as advocates in this fight. I'm going to take the pledge with Heat Watch right now, and I hope you all do too. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.